The world has never been a more dangerous place for Africans in the last 2 to 3 centuries. In fact, this moment can only be compared to when slavery was institutionalized on the continent. I am Maurice Odhiambo, the African teacher, right here in Nairobi, Kenya. And today, I want to ask the question, can the state in Africa save the African people and the black civilization? Now, let's talk a bit about the Westphalian state system. Now, Africa literally inherited the state from European colonization. So the state in Africa, unlike the state elsewhere, was created to serve European interests. In international relations, we say the state is a rational entity. But because of its origins, the state in Africa has never been a rational entity. In fact, Frantz Fanon, the great theoretician, theorized that only a violent rupturing of the colonial state in Africa and its recreation could turn it into a rational entity that is knowledgeable about its own existence and its role in protecting black civilization. Pan-Africanists always held that Africa must be the geographical expression of the black civilization. Of course, Pan-Africanism had its roots in the black diaspora. But the black diaspora at that point had the advantage of really understanding the state system, sometimes more than the black elites here in Africa at that point in time. Professor Ali Mazrui similarly equated the African state to the refugees that it creates. In fact, he dramatically called the state in Africa a political refugee. And I want to quote directly from Professor Ali Mazrui. Most African states are artificial, and both the state and the refugees are fundamentally without roots. The rootlessness and artificiality of the African state are attributable to its colonial origins and its artificial boundaries. I'll go on quoting Professor Mazrui. In global terms, the African state has become increasingly marginalized and has been pushed to the ghetto of the world system. Like Africa's refugees, many African states were already living at least partly on handouts even before the 1990s. And it will be difficult not to agree with these two scholars in terms of their characterization of the state in Africa, in terms of Frantz Fanon's theorization that only a rupture can save the state. But remember that a rupture can also be unity. So unity can also be a way of rupturing the African state. Our elites in Africa have been opposed to that process, which then could have made the state in Africa more rational than it is today. Now, the world is going through fundamental seismic shifts in terms of power. The world that was created, rather the world order that was created by America in the 1940s is crumbling. International law has been shredded. The United Nations Charter has been shredded. It only remains as a symbol of power that is racialized. Now, the question today, the most fundamental question for African scholars, for African elites, for African activists, for African poets, for African artists, is the same question that I've posed. Can the state in Africa serve Africans at this point in time? Why is it that the African state has refused to become rational? Should we go back to Frantz Fanon's thinking about the rapturing of the state? But how would that work at this point in time when we have some semblance of a middle class which is invested in the state as it is now? The Americans attacked Venezuela. The Americans attacked Nigeria. The Americans have threatened Cuba and other countries. Why is it that Africans are sitting tight and thinking that this war is not coming to Africa? If this war is based on the struggle for preeminence between China and America, then Africa will ultimately be the fighting platform. This is what African scholars, African artists, African politicians, everybody has to rally around this issue. What is the solution? Why is it that African solutions to African problems continues to be a failure? Africans, wake up.